I just want everybody out there to know I'm going to be all right if we don't win the championship.
LeBron's always stacking his teams.
He always stacks his team.
If I play again, it's going to have to be an ideal scenario. I'm going to have to be with some really good players. I don't want to play on a mediocre team. There's only like 5 or 6 really good teams in the NBA.
He's always stacked his team. Yo, man, you always stacking your team. He stacked it in Miami. He stacked it in Cleveland. He stacked it in LA. Now he's stacking it in Philly.
Charles Barkley called LeBron James a team stacker again, 4th time now. Same word every time. Miami, Cleveland, the Lakers, and now, at 41 years old, walking into a locker room in Philadelphia where Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and Jaylen Brown are already sitting there waiting for him. And look, the criticism isn't new, and it isn't even wrong on its face. LeBron has a type, and the type is already has multiple max contracts in the building. But here's the part nobody brought up on that show. 29 years before Barkley said any of this, Charles Barkley stood at a podium in Houston, Texas, next to Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler, and said something that swapped the year and the city reads like a transcript of LeBron's own introductory press conference in Miami. I don't guarantee anything, but I have no problem saying this. If we don't win a championship, I'll be crushed. So today we are doing something Barkley himself never really has, going back through his own career, trade by trade, and checking his math. Not to dunk on him, genuinely stick around, because where this lands might surprise you if you already have a comment typed out. We are not skipping the parts that don't fit the thesis. That is not how this channel works. Quick timeline, because it matters later. Barkley gets drafted by Philly in '84, plays 8 seasons, never gets past the 2nd round, watches Julius Erving retire and Moses Malone get traded out from under him. And by 1992, he's basically a one-man show with Hersey Hawkins showing up to help when he can. He's frustrated, fair enough, so he does what every disgruntled star eventually does. Goes to the front office and says the 2 words, "Get me out." I said, just get me out of here and trade me anywhere. I did not say trade me a powerhouse. The Suns were not a powerhouse when I got there. And this part actually checks out completely. There's a real reported version of this where the Lakers agreed to send James Worthy to Philly for Barkley. His agent calls him mid-lunch to say it's done. Barkley starts celebrating, and 3 hours later the deal's dead. The Sixers backed out, and he's back at the arena that night like nothing happened. That is not a guy plotting his own super team. That is a guy finding out about his own trade from a phone call at lunch twice in 2 different directions in the same year. He ends up in Phoenix instead for Jeff Hornacek, Tim Perry, and Andrew Lang, 3 names you never heard and never will again, joining Kevin Johnson and Dan Marley on a franchise that had not stacked. Barkley is right about that part. He shows up, wins MVP in year 1, and drags a team that wasn't a contender into being one. That is not a stacking roster. It is the opposite of a stacking roster. That is what an actual superstar upgrade looks like. Here's where it gets interesting, because what Barkley told Stephen A about this next trade and actually what happened in August of 1996 are not the same story. The version he is telling now, including a separate appearance on the Dan Patrick Show, is that he was blindsided, that he never wanted to leave Phoenix, that the front office told him he wasn't being shopped, and then traded him behind his back. They traded me behind my back. I was totally blindsided when I got traded from the Suns to the Rockets. I never wanted to leave Phoenix.
Well, my team in Phoenix was not stacked. Let's get that out the way. We had a good, solid team, but we weren't stacked. And I got traded out of Phoenix. I didn't want to leave Phoenix.
I think they've showed me no respect, but I can't honestly say I could come back to work here after they've shopped me around all summer and give 110%.
I was totally blindsided when I got traded from the Suns to the Rockets.
Except go back to 2013, Barkley is doing an NBA TV interview for his 50th birthday, and the story is different. He says the Suns, quote, screwed him, and by his own account in that interview, he had actually asked for a trade in 1996. The Suns screwed me. And then there's the actual press coverage from the day it happened, not a podcast 20 years later. The writing from that week, it doesn't say blindsided, it doesn't say against his will, it says the opposite. Charles Barkley got his wish. Monday he was traded to a contender. That same piece of coverage describes the deal as adding a third All-Star to a roster that already had Clyde Drexler and Hakeem Olajuwon on it. 2 first-ballot Hall of Famers, 2 former champions, not a rebuilding project, not a mercy trade. Reported in real time as exactly the kind of move we're used to mocking LeBron for 30 years before anyone mocked LeBron for it. And remember that line from top of this video, if we don't win a championship, I'll be crushed. That is not a guy who got dealt and shrugged it off. That is a guy talking exactly the way we roast LeBron for talking. Now, to be fair to him, because that is the whole point of this video, Barkley wasn't inventing a grievance out of nothing. He really had soared on the Suns organization before the trade. They had fired his coach, Paul Westphal, mid-season. They traded away Dan Marley, his running mate for 4 years. There was a real frustration underneath this. The problem isn't that he was upset. The problem is the specific story he's telling right now doesn't match the guy who stood in front of reporters in August of 1996. 1998 lockout ends, Michael Jordan retires for the first time, and Scottie Pippen, 6 championship rings, signs a deal with Chicago and gets immediately signed and traded to Houston to play alongside Barkley and Olajuwon. 3 Hall of Famers, 1 roster, and here's the detail that never comes up in any of these arguments. Barkley took a pay cut voluntarily, specifically so the Rockets could fit Pippen's contract under the salary cap. Say that back slower because it is the whole ball game. A star player giving back his own money to help his own front office build a super team around him. That didn't happen to Barkley. Barkley did that, and structurally, that is exactly the move everyone credits or blames LeBron, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh for inventing in Miami 14 years later. It didn't work, by the way. By February, the 2 of them could barely stand each other. The Rockets went 31-19 in that shortened season and were bounced in the first round. And years later, promoting his memoir, Pippen didn't hold back. I didn't realize Charles wasn't as dedicated as I thought he would be. So if you want to defend Barkley by pointing at results, this is not the chapter you want. It is the time for the roster construction actually matches the accusation, and the results still didn't show up. So where does that leave us? 3 trades, 3 different stories, and if you're already drafting a comment, it probably reads something like, "So Barkley is a hypocrite, video over, thanks for playing." Not so fast, because played with the other good players was never actually the accusation. Nobody has ever dragged a guy for having good teammates. Bird had McHale and Parrish. Magic had Kareem, that is just basketball. The actual accusation against LeBron, the one that is stuck to his whole legacy, is more specific than that. It is then in his prime, at the peak of his powers, he used free agency as a tool to personally assemble rosters around himself. Miami in 2010, Cleveland's second run, getting Kyrie and Kevin Love. The Lakers getting Anthony Davis 3 times in his prime by his own design. Now go back through Barkley's file with that specific definition, not the loose one. Philadelphia to Phoenix, involuntary, no input on the destination, landed on a team that genuinely wasn't stacked. Phoenix to Houston, yes, the story he's telling now doesn't match 1996, but it was still a trade. The front office picked the destination, not Barkley. The one time, the only time Barkley actually did what LeBron's accused of, engineering a star pairing with his own money. He was in the twilight of his career, one season from retirement, and it collapsed in a single year. So is Barkley a hypocrite? Sort of. Technically. Once. At the very end, in a version that failed almost immediately. Is he the same thing as LeBron? A guy who did this 3 separate times in his own prime and won titles doing it? Not even close. The honest answer, the one that doesn't fit clearly on either side. Barkley is right that the accusation gets thrown around lazily and he is still not being fully straight about his own history. Both of those are true at the same time. 29 years ago, Charles Barkley stood at a podium in Houston and said almost exactly what LeBron's saying right now, walking into Philadelphia. The difference was never that one of them stacked the team. The difference was never that one of them stacked the team and the other didn't. The difference is what happened next. One of them is telling the story straight and the other one is being quietly rewriting his for 13 years. Figure out which is which. That is basketball history for you. It is never as clean as the guy holding the microphone wants it to be.